was about to call its next witness before we took our last break, so you may do so now.
David, call Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller, this way, please. Raise your right hand before we get this. You solemnly swear to testify the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Sir, if you would state your name and spell your last name for the court reporter, please.
Sure. My name is Frank P. Miller, last name Miller.
And what is your occupation?
I am a forensic pathologist. I'm the Chief Deputy Coroner of Lorraine County and a Deputy Coroner for Stark County and Trumbull County.
And how long have you held those positions?
I've been the Chief Deputy and working for Stark for the last 5 years. Before that, I did 13 years at the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office.
You are also a licensed physician in the state of Ohio?
Yes.
And what education and training have you had that allows you to hold the positions that you've just described?
Sure. I went to college and medical school at Case Western Reserve, and I did 5 years of residency in pathology or hospital lab testing at University Hospitals of Cleveland. Then I did a year's fellowship in forensic pathology, which is performing autopsies and evaluating how and why people died at the University of Texas through the Dallas County Medical Examiner in Dallas, Texas. So I was there for 12 months. That's called a subspecialty fellowship after pathology residency. And I finished fellowship in 1998 and was already board certified in pathology in 1997, became certified in forensic pathology in 1998, and I've practiced in Ohio ever since.
And your medical license is current?
Yes.
And are you required to undergo continuing medical education?
Yes.
And how many hours are you supposed to have?
We have to show evidence of 50 hours per year.
And are you current in that requirement?
Yes, I think I have 110 hours for the last 2-year cycle.
I believe you indicated that you're board certified in 2 areas?
Yes.
And what are those areas?
It's called anatomic and clinical pathology, or basically hospital pathology. And then I'm also certified in forensic pathology, which is the specific discipline of investigating deaths.
And when we use the term board certified, what does that mean?
In addition to finishing medical school and the 6 years of residency that were required at the time, I took a national examination in pathology that was 3 days long and a day-long examination in forensic pathology and passed the test.
Have you in the past held teaching positions?
Yes.
Where have you taught?
I lecture annually at the Case Western Reserve Medical School. I give 2 lectures. One is an hour and a half long, the other is 2 hours long. Over the years, I've helped out in the microscope lab, done a lot of demonstration autopsies, and dealt with rotating residents and medical students.
Are you a member of any professional organizations?
Yes, I belong to the Cleveland Society of Pathologists, the National Association of Medical Examiners, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and the College of American Pathologists.
Have you testified before, sir, in the courts of Stark County and the courts of Ohio as an expert with regard to autopsies and cause of death?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, has that testimony been accepted by the courts?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
I would offer Dr. Miller as an expert.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you.
He will be so designated.
Dr. Miller, if you would explain to the folks of the jury what is an autopsy.
Sure. An autopsy is the surgical dissection of a deceased human being, in my case, and we are looking for any distinguishing features, signs of disease, signs of injury, and we also do chemical tests. Sometimes there's forensic science tests, and the goal is to determine how and why someone died. So we will go through the entire body, look at the outside for any signs of disease or injury or any distinguishing features that identifies them as a unique person. Then we will remove the organs from the chest and the abdomen, as well as the brain from the head, and look through those organs for any signs of injury or disease. We also collect body fluids for drug and chemical testing, and sometimes we do bacterial testing for infections, things like that. And after we've done our tests and looked at the body, looked at some microscopic slides that we make from the organs, we reach a conclusion as to how and why someone died.
What can those conclusions be?
The cause can be anything. The cause of death is the actual injury or illness that causes death. But then how someone dies is broken into basically 5 categories. It's 4 categories, and then the last one is cannot be determined. It's natural causes, which is most cases, or it can be an accident, an unplanned, unexpected event, suicide, death by the person's own actions, intentional actions, and then homicide, the death of one person caused by the actions of another person. And if we can't sort natural from accident, from suicide, from homicide, we call that undetermined manner, or cannot be determined, is what the box officially says on the death certificate.
On January 2nd, 2015, were you employed as a deputy coroner for Stark County, Ohio?
Yes.
And on that date, did you have an occasion to perform an autopsy on the body of Rob McKernan?
Yes.
And did you perform that autopsy at the coroner's office?
Right.
And you personally performed it?
I did.
Were you able to determine Mr. McKernan's height and weight?
Yes.
And could you tell us what that was?
His measured height was 6 feet 0 inches. We approximated his weight to be 210 pounds.
When you receive a body at the coroner's office, the body's transported by ambulance usually?
Yes, by the transport services used by the coroner, yes.
And what kind of container is the body brought to you in?
It's usually brought to us in a body bag, which zips completely shut. Many of them can be sealed or zipped closed.
And when you begin an autopsy, do you give it a unique number with respect to the Stark County Coroner's Office?
Yes, each case is given its own case number, which appears on all the testing items and the reports.
In this case, Mr. McKernan's body was originally brought to you in a body bag.
Yes.
And when you opened the bag, can you tell these folks what you observed?
Sure. His hands had been bagged in paper bags. He was dressed in a blue thermal long-sleeve shirt, a white zip-up hoodie. He had new-looking athletic shoes and a brown belt and black booty socks. His pants are not dictated, but the pants are there because the pants pockets are turned inside out when first examined.
Okay.
So basically fully dressed.
Is it unusual for a person's mouth or head to be wrapped?
No. If there's any body fluids leaking, frequently the transport service will put a towel over the face to prevent spread of contamination.
Okay. I want to show you, sir, what's been marked as State's Exhibit.
Just a general idea. They're all like
Show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19A. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And can you tell me what that is?
Sure. This is a photograph taken in the course of the autopsy of Robert McKernan. It's labeled with his name and case number and shows his black bag on the body lift.
Show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19B.
19B, this is a view. These body bags have 2 layers. There's an outer black plastic layer, then an inner clear plastic layer. There's special body bags that are used. So this 19B is a picture of the body of Robert McKernan still inside the clear layer, but the black layer of the body bag has been zipped back.
You also received information from the coroner's investigator, Mr. Campbell,
Yes, we have investigator preliminary reports when we do the autopsy.
And in this case, were you advised by Mr. Campbell that there are items placed in Mr. McKernan's body's mouth prior to removal?
Yes.
Show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19C. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is a photograph of 2 teeth that were placed in the mouth by Mr. Campbell by report and recovered from the mouth by my assistant in my supervision and presence. And these are 2 broken or fractured teeth related to the Robert McKernan autopsy.
Show you what's been marked as 19D.
This is another photograph of broken teeth fragments.
The first step in the autopsy is removing the clothing.
Yes. Well, after photographing the dressed body, we remove the clothing, yes.
And what do you do with that clothing?
That clothing is dried and given to the law enforcement agency for submission to the crime laboratory if they want to have it tested.
And after removing the clothing, do you then conduct an external autopsy on the body of Robert McKernan?
Yes.
And the external autopsy is what you refer to as viewing the body for any signs of injury?
Yes, it's also referred to as an external examination.
And in this case, when you externally examined the body of Robert McKernan, what did you observe as far as external injuries, the number of external injuries?
After doing his external exam and correlating it later, it turns out he has 10 gunshot wounds of the head, trunk, and upper extremities. In addition, he has a grazed gunshot wound of the right arm, and he had a brown contusion or bruise on the right upper arm, which was overlying a bullet, so the bruise was caused by the bullet. And that's what we found, 10 gunshots, a grazed wound on the right arm, and some bruising related to a bullet that was in the right chest.
With respect to gunshot cases, do you oftentimes x-ray the body prior to conducting your internal autopsy?
Yes.
And in this case, did you have x-rays conducted on the body of Robert McKernan?
Yes.
Were those x-rays then transferred to a CD?
Yes.
Ms. Day, if you would, could you punch up what's been marked as State's Exhibit 20?
Yes. Just need the laptop.
Working?
Give it a sec. All right.
Okay, in the second view. I put up on the screen, Doctor, can you see that? What's marked as State's Exhibit 20. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And can you tell us what that is?
Sure. This is a lateral view skull x-ray. You can see 2 very white objects and then a sort of translucent whiter object near the more round, dark white object at the bottom of the x-ray. And what we are looking at is the side view of a head with the left bottom of the picture being a mixture of dental fillings and bullet fragments. And then the right side, you can see in the rounded part of the skull, there's a very white object that is a bullet, which is inside the cranial cavity or in the brain cavity. And there's another bullet at the back of the neck, which is in the right lower corner. Next to that is that translucent piece I'm talking about. That is the jacket of the bullet, which pulled off. So there's what are basically objects large enough to be 2 bullets seen in this x-ray of the head and neck.
Doctor, do you see that stylus there?
Yes.
Could you just circle those areas that you described as blue?
Sure. This here is 1 bullet, and this combination here is a bullet and a jacket present in the head and neck.
Now, through the course of your internal autopsy, were you able to, let me back up and strike that, let me ask you this. You do a report at the time of your autopsy.
Yes.
You number the wounds how is it that you number the wounds, doctor?
This is a convention for reporting. I number them one to whatever, in this case 1 to 10. I start on the front of the body at the head, so it's head to foot on the front side, then head to toe on the back of the body. And that's just my numbering system for describing them, that this is number 1, it's here, it shows this. It doesn't mean it's gunshot wound number 1 or incurred first. It just means the first one I'm describing is number 1. The 10th one I'm describing is the 10th one I'm describing, and that's all the numbering scheme means.
As a board-certified forensic pathologist, are you able to tell the sequence of wounds and when and how they were inflicted?
You can almost never tell the order of wounds that were inflicted. The exception is sometimes in gunshot wounds of the head, the fractures that one bullet causes will stop the fractures of a second bullet. Not a factor in this case, but sometimes you can tell that, but that's all. That's in a limited situation and it only involves being shot in the head. In general, you cannot tell what order bullets were inflicted.
You then, after observing the external injuries, conduct your internal autopsy.
Yes.
And let's start out with regard to your internal autopsy with what you've numbered as gunshot wound number 1. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. Gunshot wound number 1, this is in the right upper lip, and I located in space 7.5 inches below the vertex or top of the head, and 1/4 inch to the right of the anterior midline. That's a line down the middle of the body that would run through the center of the nose and the upper lip. It's a 1/4 inch skin split. It has stippling, which is partially burned and unburned gunpowder, which is sprayed onto the skin, seen around it. I measured that. It's between 1.5 and 2.5 inches around the wound. And then we note that the palate or the upper jaw is fractured. And you want me to describe everything, or just?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the path of that one goes through the right upper lip, then it goes into the palate or the maxillary teeth, the upper jaw. That goes through the base of the skull and goes into the temporal and occipital lobes of the brain and penetrates into the right occiput. So the bullet ends up in the right back of the head and goes through the brain kind of next to and above your ear and at the back of the head on the right. So that one went through the body front to back, upward through the body, and slightly left to right because it moved more to the right as it went to the back of the head.
Now, with regard to State's Exhibit 20 on the screen, were you able to recover that bullet?
Yes.
And which bullet is it on State's Exhibit 20 there on the screen?
It's the upper one, the one that's inside the rounded portions of the skull. And it's a medium caliber, jacketed hollow point bullet, and it's recovered from the right occiput or within the brain.
Doctor, a couple of questions. When a bullet enters a body, does the bullet just go in without anything coming out?
It can. It depends on the skin and muscle closing over the wound. In general, in a confined space like the brain, sometimes brain matter will be sprayed out or blood or tissue. But sometimes, like an abdomen gunshot wound, you may not get anything at the edge of the wound, or sometimes you see a little bit of subcutaneous fat stick out.
How about with an area in the mouth?
And the mouth and the head and the face are very vascular, so you're going to get a lot of bleeding as the upper jaw is broken because the blood vessels that go to your brain run through the base of your skull right at the back of your mouth. And the lips have a lot of blood supply, so you're going to see bleeding in the mouth or inside the nose and mouth with the fractures.
And so that blood or teeth and other substances going to come out this way?
That's certainly could, yes.
It's kind of like when you drop a pebble in a glass of water, the water comes up and spreads out?
Yes.
You mentioned the word stippling, doctor. What is stippling?
Stippling is gunshot residue. When a projectile comes out of a gun, it's because the powder underneath it is burning very rapidly, becoming a gas and expanding in pressure. Some of the gunpowder may not burn up by the end of the barrel, and so you get partially burned and unburned granules of the actual gunpowder that spray out the end of the gun. It sprays out in kind of a cone shape, but it's really small and really light. So any smoke from fully burned gunpowder comes out, and it doesn't go far at all because it's smoke, so it doesn't really have any weight to fly through the air. So the first few inches, 6 inches to a foot, you'll see smoke. But these little particles are a little bit heavier. They'll fly out 2-3 feet sometimes from the end of the gun. And they spray in a cone shape from the diameter of the muzzle to a much wider diameter. So the farther it is from the end of the gun, the more speckled the pattern gets. Really close to the end of the gun is very tight. It's a small cone. But as you get farther away, you get little individual dots where actually the skin is being scraped and burned by these granules.
And in State's exhibit, in the first gunshot wound that you described, you indicated that you measured the stippling?
Yes.
And what was the dimensions of it?
It's on the face, and this is the right side of the nose, but you see large patterns, 5 by 4 inches overall. But as we discuss gunshot 2, you'll see that it's 2 stippling patterns that are overlapping each other. But for one, we know that it's 2 inches above the wound at 3 o'clock, which is sort of toward the nose and toward the middle. I can't really tell you how wide it is, but it's 6 o'clock. So it goes down about 1.5 inches and then over about 2.5 inches from his right lip onto his right face.
And what does that tell a person trained in your profession in regards to the muzzle of the gun and how close it was to the body?
You have to use the exact gun and the exact brand of ammunition, and some people are sticklers. You have to use the exact batch or lot of ammunition too. But in general, we say that if you see stippling, the gun was no more than 2 feet, 3 feet at the outside away from the person when it was discharged.
I'll show you now, Dr., what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19E. You recognize that photograph?
Yes, Exhibit 19E is a photograph taken of Robert McKernan at the time of autopsy, and it shows the stippling on the face.
Does it also show the gunshot wound to the right lip that you just previously described?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19F. Is that a close-up of the same injury?
19F is the same injury, but it features the left face.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19G. You recognize that, sir?
Yes, 19G is a photograph of the bullet taken from the head. It shows a separated jacket and bullet, and it shows the tube we put it in marked as bullet head.
Is that the bullet in the upper portion of the x-ray that you have circled in State's Exhibit 20?
Yes.
And I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 7A. You recognize that?
The State's Exhibit 7A is the tube with our label and my assistant's handwriting that says bullet head that's depicted in the picture.
And again, Doctor, you testified, what was the course and direction of that bullet?
Yeah, the course and direction is front to back, upward, and slightly left to right.
Talk about gunshot wound number 2. Where did you observe that?
Gunshot wound number 2 is on the left upper lip and involves the left upper lip and the lower lip, and it has an abrasion on the edges. There's more stippling seen there. This is 1.5 inches above the wound, 1 inch from the wound onto the left face, 1 inch from the wound downward onto the lower lip and face, and then at, as I say in the one, around the nose at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, if you're looking like a clock face, those 2 patterns overlap, so you really can't measure it. So it's 1 inch to 1.5 inches around the left lip wound.
And again, were you able to determine the path of that bullet?
Yes, the path of this bullet went through the left upper and lower lip, and then it went through the mandible, the left mandible or lower jaw, and the bottom of the tongue or base of the tongue, and it went into the subcutaneous tissues of the right neck, and in the course of going through the mandible, it fractured many of the teeth. And again, we found a medium caliber jacketed hollow point bullet. This is in the right neck, in the muscle and underneath the skin or subcutaneous tissues. And we photographed that bullet and put it in a container.
And again, were you able to determine the course and direction of that bullet?
Yes, this one was front to back, left to right, and slightly downward through the body.
Again, is that depicted in the State's Exhibit 20 on the screen?
Yes.
That's the lower circle?
Right, that's the lower one circled, yeah.
I want to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19H. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes.
And what's that depict?
19H is, again, the face of Robert McKernan. This features the right side of his face, but it shows the injuries we're talking about.
Show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19I.
19I is the container labeled posterior right neck bullet, and the bullet recovered from the right neck in this case.
And then finally showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 7B. Do you recognize that?
Yes, the 7B, this is the tube with our label and the labeling that's seen in the photograph, so this is the bullet taken from the right neck.
Were those the only two injuries to the head of Mr. McKernan?
Yes.
Did you then go on and examine the rest of the body?
Yes.
And can you describe for these folks what you found with respect to gunshot wound number 3?
Sure. Gunshot wound number 3 is on the side or lateral left arm, and this wound did not have any residue around it, but we know he's wearing clothing. Any residue lands on the first thing it comes to, so in a person who's dressed, all the gunshot residue is on the clothes, not on the person. This goes through his arm, so it goes through the side of his left arm, then goes into and across his arm, and so the inside part of his left upper arm, it comes out, then it goes back into his left chest, and then it goes into the muscles around his arm and axillary armpit and ends up under the left shoulder blade or scapula. It's in the soft tissues and muscle. Never went into the chest cavity.
I want to talk about that initial entrance wound in the left arm, doctor. What was the characteristics of that entrance wound?
Sure. This is a round half-inch wound. It has a quarter-inch defect or perforation in the skin. There's a circumferential marginal abrasion, and it's up to a quarter-inch from the edge of the wound. At 2 o'clock, other than that, it's generally more like 1/16 inch to 3/16 inch. There's no residue around it.
With respect to the entry wound being round, what does that tell you in relation to the muzzle of the gun and Rob's body?
When the gun went off, the muzzle of the gun was pointed at the side of his left arm. So the path of the barrel and the front back of Rob McKernan were essentially nearly perpendicular.
So the bullet went in this way?
Yes.
Was that bullet recovered?
Yes.
And can you tell us where it was recovered?
Sure. This bullet is another jacketed soft point. This is a soft point bullet, jacketed, and that's from the muscle anterior or in front of the left shoulder blade, and it's measured as 56 inches above the sole of his foot, he being 72 inches tall, and 4 inches to the left of a line down the middle of his back. And we photographed this, placed it in a labeled container, and handed that over to the police. In this particular case, the label on the bullet ended up mislabeled. It's from his left shoulder blade.
And on the screen in front of you is State's Exhibit 20, and it's been changed. Do you recognize what's on the screen in front of you?
Yes.
And what is that?
This is the chest x-ray. You can see several opaque objects. These are all bullets that were recovered during the course of the autopsy.
Is the bullet that we just talked about depicted in that photograph, or that
Yes.
x-ray?
Yes.
Could you circle it, please?
Sure. This is the shoulder blade. It's this bullet we're talking about right now.
And I want to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19J. Can you tell me what that is?
19J is a close-up photograph of his left arm, and there's a gunshot wound right through a tattoo.
And that entry wound, as you described, is pretty round.
It's fairly round.
Show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19K.
19K, this is the inside of the left arm. Again, you can see the tattoo that goes around the arm, and there's a gunshot wound on the inside of the arm, on the chest side of his arm.
And then show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19L.
19L, this is a photograph of the left side of his trunk or chest. You see two gunshot wounds here. The one that's nearest to the arm tattoo is the re-entrance of gunshot wound 3.
So as you're holding the picture, the wound to the right side of the picture is the re-entry wound from the left arm.
That's correct. The bullet, or the wound on the right is the re-entry of gunshot 3, which is from the left arm.
I'll show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19M.
19M, this is a photograph of a container with the label. It says bullet, right scapula, shows the jacketed bullet and the case number and the McKernan name. So this is the bullet. Unfortunately, it's labeled right, but it's left. But this is the container and the bullet that went in it.
And showing you State's Exhibit 7C, you recognize that?
Yes, this is the labeled container with the erroneous hand labeling. It's right instead of left, but this is the bullet taken from gunshot wound 3.
And that bullet traveled what direction?
The course and direction on this is left to right and front to back through the body.
With respect to gunshot wound number 4 that you observed, could you describe that for these folks?
Sure. Gunshot 4 is on the lateral left chest. It's measured 51 inches above his sole of his foot and 6 inches to the left of the anterior midline. This is a more oval wound, 3/8 by a quarter. Has a 1/4 inch defect and a relatively circumferential abrasion, so it's close to round. No residue around it, so the stippling are not present. And this goes through the skin and subcutaneous tissue, or the underlying tissues of the skin, of the lateral or side of the left chest, and perforates the 6th intercostal space, which is the muscle between the 6th and 7th ribs, the parietal and visceral pleura, or the lining over the left lung, the lower lobe of the left lung, the mediastinum, which is the tissues in the middle of the chest, missing the heart and aorta, etc., and then goes into the upper lobe of the right lung and goes to the right 3rd intercostal space. So this is the muscle between the 3rd and 4th right ribs, and goes into the subcutaneous right back.
Again, the round nature of that wound, what does that tell you about the relationship of Rob to the gun?
The gun, an axis through his front to back, is relatively perpendicular to the barrel of the gun.
Was a bullet recovered in that case too?
Yes, this is a jacketed hollow point bullet. and as well as a red plastic fragment. This is recovered from the subcutaneous right upper back, and we photographed it and put it in a labeled container.
Is that depicted on State's Exhibit 20?
Yes. That's this bullet.
Let me show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19N. The wound you just described depicted in that photograph.
Yes, 19N shows a wound. It's on the side of the chest. It's the one that's farther from the barbed wire tattoo.
And State's Exhibit 19O, is that a close-up of the wound?
Yes, this is a close-up of that wound.
Does that show the round nature of the entry wound?
Yes.
Show you what's been marked as 19P.
19P says bullet right back on the label and shows the red plastic fragment and the hollow point bullet. This is taken from gunshot 4.
I'll show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 7D.
7D, this is the labeled container shown in the picture containing the hollow point bullet and plastic from this gunshot wound.
What was the course and direction of that wound?
Left to right, upward, and front to back.
Moving on then to gunshot wound number 5, as you found it in your autopsy, could you describe that, please?
Sure. This one is on the mid-right chest, 50.5 inches up and 1.5 inches to the right of the anterior midline, or a line down the front of the body. This is a 5/8 by 1/2 inch wound, which has a 3/8 by 1/4 inch defect and has a marginal abrasion that's up to a 1/4 inch from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock, so the sort of bottom right corner as you're looking at it, or rather just the bottom part as you're looking at it, has a wider abrasion. There's no soot or stippling. This goes through the chest and goes into the muscles, the chest, goes into the middle lobe of the right lung and penetrates into the T10, T11 thoracic vertebral bodies.
Now, Doctor, you indicated that it had a marginal abrasion, 1/4 inch from the edge of the wound from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock?
Yes.
And what do you mean by that?
The edge of the skin is scraped as the bullet slides past. As we look at somebody sort of in our minds, upright head to toe, 12 o'clock is the head end, 6 o'clock is the feet end. So from 4 to 8 o'clock, the sort of bottom edge of this wound on his body has more abrasion or scraping than the rest of the wound, telling us the bullet is sort of sliding in at an upward angle through his skin.
Would that be consistent with someone who was lying on the ground and the shooter standing up?
That would be one way to explain the upward path, yes.
Let me show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19Q. Recognize that?
Yes, this is a picture of the chest showing a gunshot wound to the right of the midline, and you can see the abrasion at the bottom part.
And is this a State's Exhibit 19R, a close-up of that?
Yes, 19R is a closer photo of this wound.
And with respect to 19R, there's a card there that has this case number, correct?
Yes.
And the area that you're talking about that indicates the bullet entered in an upward fashion is the bottom part of the wound?
Right. The area of the wound opposite the edge of the card has a wider abrasion.
Were you able to recover a bullet connected to that?
Yes.
And is that depicted in State's Exhibit 20?
Yes.
With the circle.
Sure. This is a bullet taken from the spinal column, and it's a jacketed hollow point, and it is this one.
Show Show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19S. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is a photograph of our container labeled bullet overlying T10 spine and the jacketed bullet that we got out of the spinal column. And so this is the bullet we're talking about right now.
Show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 7E.
7E, this is the container in the photograph and has the bullet in the photograph inside it.
Were you able to continue or to determine the course and direction of that bullet?
Yes, this one is front to back, right to left, and upward.
With respect to gunshot wound number 6, Doctor, could you describe that for us?
Sure. Gunshot wound number 6 is on the left lower abdomen. Again, it's measured up 42 inches, 3 inches to the left of the anterior midline. It's 5/8 by 3/8 inch, so it's sort of oval, has a 1/4 inch defect, and there is an abrasion around it. And in this case, the widest part of the abrasion is at 7 o'clock, which is, again, sort of the bottom left corner as you're looking at the wound. No soot or stippling seen.
Now, Doctor, with respect to gunshot wounds 6 and 7, 8, and 9, previously in gunshot wounds number 1 through 5, you were able to determine individual internal injury paths. Is that correct?
That's correct.
With respect to gunshot wounds number 6 that you described, 7, 8, and 9, were you able to do that?
No.
Why is that?
All of these are gunshot wound paths through the abdomen, through the intestines, and so there are multiple paths through the liver and the contents of the abdomen, and it was difficult to figure out which path belonged to which. So there's 4 gunshot wounds with 4 retained bullets in the abdomen area, and I can't really match a bullet to an entrance. So rather than do that, I labeled them gunshot wounds 6, 7, 8, and 9, and bullets A, B, C, and D, and just described the whole abdominal injuries in one bulk.
Does gunshot wound number 6 appear in State's Exhibit 20?
No.
You cannot describe which bullet.
No, I can't really tell you which bullet it's going to be.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19T. Can you tell me what's depicted in this?
Sure. This is the gunshot wound of the left abdomen that was described as gunshot wound 6.
That's this area of the body?
Yes.
And again, the abrasion mark is where?
It is on the lower right aspect of the wound.
Which would indicate the bullet entered the body in a fashion like this.
Yes.
Could you describe, Doctor, please, gunshot wound 7?
Sure. Gunshot wound 7. This is on the left back. This one's up 54 inches and 4.5 inches left. It's a 5/16 by 1/4 inch wound, and it has a marginal abrasion which is largest at 9 o'clock, or the left-hand side as you're looking at it. No sort of stippling around it.
And gunshot wound number 8?
Number 8, this is again on the left back. The first one being on the left back, up 54 inches. This one is the lateral left back, so farther to the side, up 51 3/4 inches. And 5.5 inches from a line down the back. This is a 1/2 inch by 3/8 inch wound with a 1/4 by 3/16 inch defect, and its largest abrasion is a 1/4 inch, and it's 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock, or kind of on the left side as you're looking at it. The maximum width is approximately 10 o'clock, and there's no sort of stippling around it.
And gunshot wound number 9?
Number 9 is also on the left back. This one is up 48.25 inch and 4.5 inches to the left of the line down the back. it's a 1 by 5/8 inch wound. It has a 3/8 by 1/4 inch defect, and there's a marginal abrasion, which is largest at around 6 o'clock, 1/4 inch from the edge of the wound, but the abrasion extends from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock. So again, the bottom of the wound has the widest abrasion. No soot or stippling seen around it.
Show you a couple of pictures. States Exhibit 19U.
Sure. 19U, this shows the 3 gunshot wounds to the left back. You can see 7 is closest to the head, and 9 is closest to the feet, and 8 is the one in the middle. It's a little farther toward the side, and these are the 3 gunshot wounds to the left back.
And showing you 19V, is that a close-up of those wounds?
19V is a closer view of the same wounds.
Now, you indicated that the one to the left side or closer to his head is which number?
That would be number 7.
And that's a rather round entrance wound,
Yes.
which would indicate that, again, the gun is perpendicular to Mr. McKernan.
Yes. To the surface of his skin, yes.
And which number is the bottom wound?
That's number 9.
And the abrasion ring is towards his waist, correct?
Right, the abrasion ring is toward the base, so this is heading from sort of down left to upper right.
Would that be consistent with someone who's maybe bending over?
That would be one way to get an oblique path through the body, yes.
As a result of your internal autopsy, you recovered 4 bullets,
Yes,
but you cannot attribute which bullet caused which wound. Is that correct?
that is correct.
I want to show you first of all, Dr. what's been marked as States Exhibit 19W. Do you recognize that?
Yes, 19W is a jacketed bullet. The labeling is subcutaneous lateral right chest, and that's 19W.
Show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 7F.
7F is the container in that photograph containing the bullet in that photograph.
And before you now is States Exhibit 19X. Could you describe that for me?
19X is the container labeled right upper chest with a bullet and container.
Show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 7G.
7G is the container in the photograph with the bullet in the photograph.
19Y.
19Y is again a container labeled right lower chest with the jacketed bullet, with a torn jacket on this bullet, and that's 19Y.
And showing you what's been marked as 7H.
7H is, this container is labeled right lower chest, so it is the container for 19Y, yes.
And then show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 19Z.
19Z is again labeled bullet right chest on this container with the bullet that's in it.
States Exhibit 7I.
And 7I is the container that's labeled bullet right chest with the bullet that's photographed.
Doctor, you've previously described the 2 injuries to the mouth, the bullet to the brain, and to the neck area. What happens when a bullet enters somebody's brain like that?
It's not completely clear. The biggest study on it shows that if the bullet goes directly through the central part of the brain, the person, as the bullet's traveling, it has a pressure wave associated with it which stretches and tears the neurons in the brain. If they're hit directly through the center of the brain, they will pretty much drop where they are. In this case, he shot in one hemisphere, sort of on the bottom half of the cerebrum or right part of the brain. It's not completely clear he would be immediately paralyzed, but there'd be stretching and tearing of the neurons and I would not expect him to have very much voluntary motion after he is struck in the brain.
And what do you mean by voluntary motion?
I mean, I would expect him to fall down nearby.
And he was struck twice in the head,
That's correct.
but only one penetrated the brain.
Right, there's only one that involves the brain.
Can you tell me, Doctor, the 4 gunshot wounds that you've just described, 6, 7, 8, and 9, what kind of damage did those do as they traveled through the body of Rob McKernan?
Sure. The internal injuries are all grouped together. The thorax, which some of the earlier gunshot wounds shot the lungs, results at the right side of the chest. There's 750 milliliters of blood. There's 450 milliliters, which is about a pint of blood in the left chest. There's about 30 milliliters or an ounce of blood around the heart, but there's a hole in the pericardium that lets the blood in and out. And then there's about 100 milliliters of blood in the abdomen. There are gunshot wounds involving the small intestine, the liver, the pancreas, the spleen, the right lung. The mediastinum this is where the aorta and the trachea and the heart are. This has gunshot wounds through the pulmonary artery, through the aorta, through the aortic arch. The heart, the upper chambers of the heart are shot. The left kidney's been shot. And then there are perforations in a variety of ribs and muscles between the ribs.
The hemothorax, the right and left hemothorax, that's blood in the chest cavity.
Yes.
The pericardial accumulation is blood around the heart.
Yes.
And the blood in the peritoneum is in the abdominal region.
Right, that's blood in the abdominal cavity.
How does that accumulate? What causes it to accumulate?
After there's tissue damage from the gunshots, these wounds will bleed as long as there's blood pressure and the heart is pumping and providing blood pressure. So there's bleeding around from the lung tissue, from the liver tissue, the pancreas, the kidney, the spleen. So there's bleeding coming from the organs, there's bleeding coming from the blood vessels that are injured and the muscles that are injured. And this blood accumulates in the chest cavity because the muscles kind of seal the holes up again once the bullet pushes its way in.
But the heart has to be pumping.
But there has to be pressure and blood pumping, yes.
I want to talk now, Doctor, about gunshot wound number 10. Can you tell me where that was?
Sure. There's a gunshot wound. It's on the right buttock. It's measured 39.5 inches, 4.5 inches to the right of that 1/2 by 1/4 inch wound. So it's oval looking, has a 3/16 by 1 inch defect, has a marginal abrasion. The widest part is a 1/4 inch from 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock. So again, the left border of the wound as you're looking at him head to toe, soot and stiffening are not there. This went through the buttock muscle and then penetrated into the muscles of the anterior right hip.
Show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 19A, double A, excuse me.
Okay.
Recognize that?
Yes, 19AA is the right buttock wound. This is a view of the body face down, and you can see the wound that's near the number card.
And again, you indicated that the abrasion area was to the left side of that wound?
Yes.
So that would be consistent with the gun being kind of this way?
Right, it's behind him and sort of to his left.
Show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 19BB.
19BB is the container labeled bullet, subcutaneous anterolateral right hip, as well as a jacketed hollow point bullet and a red plastic fragment. So that's the container and bullet in 19BB.
Showing you what's been marked as States Exhibit 7J.
7J, this is the container shown in the picture with the expanded hollow point bullet and plastic fragment shown in the picture.
With respect, Doctor, to gunshot wounds 6, 7, and 8, you weren't able to determine independent injury tracks. Were you able to determine the course and direction of those bullets?
Yes, the left abdomen gunshot wound, which would be 6, that one is from front to back and left to right. The 3 gunshot wounds to the back are traveling from left to right and back to front through the body.
As a result, excuse me, as part of the normal course of the autopsy, do you also do toxicology?
Yes.
And in this case, are you aware of the results of that toxicology?
Yes. We were able to collect blood and urine and the fluid from the eyes, and we sent that for screening, and they were positive for ethanol or beverage alcohol.
And is there a number assigned to that positive?
Yes, the blood alcohol level of a femoral blood sample is measured as 0.125%, or usually referred to as 0.125.
Now, were there toxicology tests done at that time to determine if there were any illegal substances?
Yes, illicit or illegal substances were deliberately searched for. None were found.
Doctor, once you have completed your autopsy, do you then go on and determine a final anatomic diagnosis?
Yes.
And what is a final anatomic diagnosis?
The final anatomic diagnosis is the list of injuries and diseases found during the course of an autopsy.
And in this case, what is specifically your final anatomic diagnosis?
There are 2. The first is multiple 10 gunshot wounds of the head and trunk. 1A is 8 gunshot wounds of trunk. 1B is 2 gunshot wounds of head. C is right hemothorax, 750 milliliters, left hemothorax, 450 milliliters, hemopericardium, 30 milliliters, hemoperitoneum, 100 milliliters. 1D is perforations of brain, heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, aorta, spleen, left kidney, and intestines. Finding number 2 was acute ethanol intoxication.
Does that mean Rob died because he was drunk?
No, as I say, we list all the findings, and he was found to have a 0.125 alcohol, so we put down the intoxication.
Now, according to my addition, there's 1,320 milliliters of blood between his right hemothorax and left hemothorax, the hemopericardium and the hemoperitoneum. Is that correct?
I believe it's 1,230.
1,230, excuse me. Thank you. Is that a lot of blood?
It's for an adult human who measures to 6 liters, they probably have 7 liters. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of, a fifth or 15, 20% of his body circulating blood.
And that has to get there when his heart's beating.
Right, and that's pumped by the heart.
And if someone were doing CPR for a brief period of time, would that much blood accumulate inside those cavities?
I would think CPR would move some of the blood around, but I don't think that they would accumulate that much just from CPR.
After you determine your final anatomic diagnosis, do you then go on and to a reasonable degree of medical certainty based on the autopsy, your training and education to determine the cause of death?
Yes.
And in this case, you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the cause of death of Rob McKernan.
Yes.
And what is it?
The cause of death is multiple 10 gunshot wounds of head and trunk.
Do you then go on and determine a ruling?
Yes.
And in this case, what was that ruling?
The manner of homicide was recommended to the coroner, who certified it as homicide.
Now, at the time of your autopsy, I've shown you a bunch of photos. Do you take photographs?
Yes.
And the photographs photographs that you looked at today, do they truly or fairly and accurately depict the body of Rob McKernan as you viewed it during your autopsy?
Yes, they do.
With respect to the bullets, States Exhibits 7A through J that you removed from the body of Rob McKernan, do they appear today to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you retrieved them?
They do.
Do you take notes during your autopsy?
Yes.
And are those notes later reduced to a report?
Yes.
And is that report kept in the standard course of business with the Stark County Coroner's Office?
Yes, it is.
I'll show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 21. Recognize that?
Yes, so States Exhibit 21 is a copy of the autopsy report. It's the cover page, the investigator's report, the autopsy report, the toxicology, and the 2 death certificates related to the investigation of the death of Robert McKernan.
And is that copy a true and accurate copy of the original that's maintained by the Stark County Coroner's Office?
Yes, it is.
States Exhibits 7A through J, you place those bullets in those individual vials, what do you do with them?
Those vials are then released with a chain of custody to the law enforcement agency who may submit them for testing.
And I want to show you a bag that's marked as States Exhibit 10. Do you recognize this?
Yes, this is the bag taken January 2nd, 2015 in this case, and it shows to have his shirt and the jacket, and it's from our case.
If I could have one moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
Dr. Other than Rob's arm, his left arm, were there any other exit wounds on his body?
No, the only exit is the inside of his left arm.
And is bullet number 10 contained in States Exhibit number 20 that's on the screen before you?
Bullet 10, no, it would be in a pelvis x-ray.
There we go. Technology. Now, before you was a pelvic x-ray of States Exhibit 20. Do you see the bullet in there?
Yeah, it's almost escaped, but it's right over here at the edge. You can see right by the hip bone and pelvis, there's an opaque object, and that's the bullet for number 10.
And Exhibit number 20, as you've seen it here today, is it a true and accurate depiction of the x-rays that were taken by the Stark County Coroner's Office?
They seem to be, yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we can stand and stretch if you'd like. We are going to go ahead and proceed with the cross-examination of this witness, but if you need to stand up and get your legs going for a moment, feel free to do so. That was sort of a long period. So. All right.
Is it on?
The docu cam is on. Okay.
Good afternoon, Dr. Miller.
Good afternoon.
My name is Laura Mills, and I represent Colleen McKernan, and I promise I'm not going to keep us much longer, just a few questions, okay?
Okay.
All right. Now, you had indicated that you had ruled this a homicide, correct?
Well, officially under the law, Dr. Murthy, the coroner, ruled it homicide, but he took my recommendation.
Okay. And that recommendation for homicide doesn't indicate, and you're not here to give any kind of legal opinion that that's murder, correct?
No, it merely means that his death was caused by another person, and I believe he did not shoot himself.
I am going to put this diagram, Dr. Miller, is contained in, and I don't recall the number, but State's Exhibit, was it 20, which was?
I don't know if I saw the diagram in 21. but
21.
It could be, yeah.
All right, well, and I am also going to refer to it as Defendant's Exhibit H for
Okay,
purposes
hold
of
on.
the
I
record.
just want to make sure we got all the numbers squared away. We're talking about states 21?
21.
Okay.
Will be the same as Defendant's Exhibit H,
Okay.
Your Honor. And at the very top of this is page 20, Doctor. So if you have your report,
Okay.
this is the diagram on page 20 of that report.
Okay.
Does it look familiar?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And is this your handwriting?
No.
It is not?
No.
Okay, but you have reviewed this, correct?
Oh, yes.
All right. Whose handwriting is it?
That's my assistant.
Okay, and what's your assistant's name?
John Williams was the autopsy assistant in this
Okay.
case.
And he was present with you while you were performing the autopsy?
Yes.
Okay. Now, it's my understanding that the number sequence that you used in the report, 1 to 10, was merely for identification purposes, correct?
That's correct.
All right, you're not here to offer any opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the shot sequence, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So when we take a look at the wounds to the face, the first one is on the right side, correct?
Yes.
All right. And that first wound to the right went through the right upper lip, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe that that was in an upward motion, correct?
Yes, the path is described as front to back, upward, and slightly left to right.
Okay. And then number 2, which you have identified, would be on the left side of the mouth, correct?
Yes.
And that had a downward motion.
Yes.
And is it my understanding that only for what you've identified as shots 1 and 2 have you indicated that there could be an approximate distance of 24 inches between the muzzle and the wound entry?
That's correct. The only stippling seen, again, stippling appears on either the skin or the clothing, whatever is the next thing after the muzzle of the gun. But there is stippling on the face around both wounds, and that stippling indicates that it's 24, 3 feet at the outset.
Okay. And that, as you were explaining, Doctor, that's the gunshot residue that when it hits the skin, it's kind of, it's a burn. So you refer
Right.
to it as stippling,
Right,
correct?
it's a scrape, sort of scrape-burn combination, yes.
And it's your understanding that gunshot residue wasn't taken from the walls or the floor?
I do not know.
Okay. And shot number 3, I don't know if I can mark on here. So if this is 1, this is 2, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and now we're going to take a look at 3,
Yes.
correct? Now for all of the remaining shots that we're going to go through, Doctor, you cannot tell distances on any of those shots, correct?
That's correct.
Right. There was no soot recovered whatsoever? No soot, no residue,
No, I
nothing?
only examined the skin. I packaged the clothing without making any sort of testing on it.
Okay. So from 3 through 10, you're not here to offer any opinions as to distance?
That is correct.
All right. Is it safe for me to assume that for shots 3 through 10, the distance would be further than what you have indicated for shots 1 and 2?
I don't know what the residue results are on the clothing. If the clothing has residue on it, the distances are similar. If the clothing has no residue, there's no reason to believe that any of them are closer than the facial shots.
Okay. And on a number of occasions, and I just want to clear this up globally because I'm mindful of the time, on a number of occasions when Mr. Barr asked you for an opinion and you said, I believe you said, well, that's one way, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So when I assume that you've said that that's one way, there must be other ways. Possible?
Yes, when referring to guns and positions of the body, all I can tell is where the muzzle is angled. Because bullets move so fast, we can sort of assume that the barrel and the body are fixed in space for that one moment till the bullet comes and hits the body. So if somebody is alleged to be hanging upside down and that makes the path straight, that's possible. Laying on the floor, laying on their front, laying on their back, laying on their side, there are myriad ways for the gun and the body to meet in a perpendicular fashion or an upward fashion or a downward fashion. It depends where the body is and where the gun is. If you see in the movies, people hold their gun like this, other people hold it straight. I have no idea.
Fair to say. Did I read your report accurately, Doctor, that you believe there was more stippling from gunshot number 1 than 2?
The stippling is wider in gunshot wound number 1, I believe, than 2. Let's see. Yeah, that's up to 2.5 inches, while 2, the stippling is under 1.5 inches. So, yeah, the stippling pattern is smaller or quote-unquote tighter on gunshot wound 2.
So did I say that properly, that there was more stippling on the face from gunshot number 1?
Well, no, gunshot wound number 1, the stippling's farther apart. There may be more of the face is stippled, but it's a density thing. So the bigger the stippling pattern is, usually the less density is.
Okay. Isn't the nose kind of a general shadow or kind of
Yes.
barrier?
Yeah, usually if somebody stippled on one side of their face, it will not cross their nose.
But in this case, it did cross over, and we saw stippling from gunshot number 1 on the other side of the face, correct?
Probably because these gunshots are from the front of the face and may vary, and they're involving only it's a narrow between the lips, so it may stipple across the nose and both sides of the nose, yes.
And because it has kind of crossed over that natural barrier, it's very possible that there was a difference in the distance from gunshot 1 to gunshot 2, correct?
Yes.
So certainly for gunshot number 1 and 2, we know that the angle is different, correct?
Yes.
And certainly we know between gunshot 1 and 2, it's very possible that the distance was different, correct?
That's also correct.
And we also know that the pathway was different, correct?
That's correct.
And generally, if we would have an angle, distance, and pathway different between those 2 wound shots, being 1 and 2, that would require movement by the shooter and by Mr. McKernan in this particular case, correct?
That's, either the gun or the body or both moved relative to one another between the gunshots.
Dr. Miller, do you recall how many teeth you recovered?
The photographs only show 2, but I don't really count teeth fragments usually.
And in discussing the teeth with Mr. Barr, he used kind of used a description of a pebble and a glass of water. Do you recall that?
Yes.
All right. Is that a description that you would use?
No, well, the temporary cavity and pressure wave of the bullet may sort of, what it does is knocks the tissue backward toward the entrance. I don't think it has the fluidity of a pebble in water. It's more of a thicker event, but I would expect, a reaction to it. Most people who get fractured teeth or bleeding mouths start trying to spit either the blood or teeth or both out, unless the brain shock dropped him.
Understood, but that pebble in the water analysis that we heard, that was not yours, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And on this acute intoxication that you found from Mr. McKernan, there was actually 3 different, I think, numbers that were utilized in your report. Is that correct?
Probably. The blood value is the one that's used most often because that reflects the brain effect of the blood alcohol content. But for some reason, they measure the urines for us to help us, but a lot of people don't measure numbers in urine. But urine and eye fluid, which is the 3rd number, the vitreous concentration. So we have the numbers, blood, 0.1 and 0.137 vitreous. And vitreous fluid is an isolated fluid. It doesn't actually have circulation. The cells move the fluid in and out, so we consider that the vitreous value, number one, has different water content in blood, so it's always a little bit different, 14 to 27%. And it tends to be the level from an hour or two earlier. So vitreous in blood always vary. And in urine depends how much you can concentrate your urine. So there are 3 different values, but they're really pretty consistent with one another. The urine being the highest, but the urine has the highest water content of all those fluids. So it's just it's a substance and testing thing, and then a timing thing when it comes to the eye level.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Fair to say that Mr. McKernan was drunk?
Yes.
Okay. And as we go through these, this shot number 3 actually is the bullet that ended up going through the arm as well, correct?
Right. In the arm, out the arm, in the chest, bullet under the shoulder blade.
Okay, and this portion of the arm, the front portion of the arm.
Right, the outside to the sort of inside front to the chest.
Okay. And then we have number 4, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then we have 5.
Right.
All right, 6.
Yep.
Correct? Okay, and then if we move to the back side, we have 7, 8, 9, and 10 to the right rear buttocks, correct?
Correct.
All right, wonderful. Shots 3 through 10. None of those shots would have caused an immediate death, correct?
That's correct. The spinal column is not involved, and he has to bleed to death.
Okay. So all of those shots would require him to bleed to death, correct?
Right. Any of those shots would mainly cause bleeding, and he would have to bleed to death. Yes.
Okay, and in fact, even the wound shot to the face, which was number 2, went into the tongue, correct?
Right. That's jawbone, tongue, neck muscle. That's also a bleeding injury.
Okay, so in this particular case, this facial wound to the head would not have caused death either for number 2, correct?
Untreated, it would probably cause death, but it would not cause incapacitation.
You would need to bleed out at least in that particular
Right.
occasion, correct? All right, so shots 2 through 10 would not be an immediate death and would require an individual to bleed out in order to cause death, correct?
Correct.
And I assume until they bleed out, or at least for a fairly significant period of time, there would be voluntary motion.
Yes.
Okay, so shot number 2, there would still be voluntary motion, he could move, correct?
Correct.
Shot number 2, Mr. McKernan could move forward. If that was the first shot, he might have been able to still have his full faculties, still have the strength that he had, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and that's true for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Mr. McKernan could have moved, correct?
Yes.
Mr. McKernan would still have had his full faculties, correct?
Correct.
Mr. McKernan would still have had his full strength.
Theoretically, yes.
Okay. And I think you've indicated during direct that at least for shot number 1, that hit the brainstem, correct?
It hit the brain itself, the cerebral hemisphere, and missed the brainstem. That's why his activity is, he may or may not have dropped right over.
Understood. So his activity would certainly have been much more limited than what we saw in 3 to 10, correct?
Correct.
And you can't say with any degree of certainty how much time he would have had from that shot until he would have lost all voluntary movement, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Miller, have you investigated strangulation or choking deaths?
Yes.
Okay, and is it fair to say that within 10 seconds of being choked or strangled?
Sustained. If you want to come over and approach, we can talk about it, if there's something you want.
And Mr. Miller, just briefly, again, I'm cognizant of the time. Generally speaking, is it fair to say that it takes approximately 10 seconds until someone loses unconsciousness?
The numbers I've heard are a little bit higher, 15 to 30 seconds, but 10 is certainly in the realm of possibility. It's a study that can't be repeated. They put blood pressure cuffs around the necks of mental patients and measured when they passed out. We can't ever do that again, but the numbers they got were 15 seconds, 10 would be kind of on the short side, 30 on the long side.
Thank you, doctor. And we were talking a little bit about the lab work that is included in your report from, I believe it's AIT Laboratories, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you certainly, although you sent the samples, I assume that you didn't actually perform the toxicology required, correct?
No, that's an accredited laboratory that we subcontract all the testing to.
And I understand, but you yourself did not perform that particular testing, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you indicated in here that obviously the acute intoxication was found, but there was also stimulants found in Mr. McKernan's. I would assume blood. Is that correct?
Caffeine and nicotine, let's see.
It's on page 16 at the top if you look at the facts.
Oh, yeah. There's a category of stimulants, and in this is caffeine, nicotine, and cotinine. Nicotine and cotinine are products of tobacco smoke. In this particular case, they saw caffeine in the test. They didn't measure the amount.
Okay. And do you know whether or not it could have been anything other than caffeine?
I do not. This is a qualitative test that they do, that they initially see that it looks like caffeine, and if we genuinely are worried about a caffeine overdose or something, we will have it measured by a different kind of test, but because this is a gunshot case, we just say, he's got caffeine. So.
Understood. If I can just have a moment, Your Honor. You may. Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Mr. Barr?
Doctor, you can't tell the order of the shots because you weren't there, were you?
That's correct.
And probably the only person that can tell the order of the shots is the person who was there.
I would think that's most likely, yes.
The study with the mental patients, what did they do to them?
They put blood pressure cuffs around their necks and inflated them to block their carotid arteries and measured how long it took to pass out.
So it was around their neck?
Yes.
Wasn't somebody holding a hand over your mouth?
No, it was a blood supply. Smothering takes a little bit longer because of trapped air in the lungs, but to pass out in 10 to 15 to 30 seconds, you have to block both carotid arteries for that period of time, and then the brain runs out of glucose and passes out, and oxygen.
Hard to do with one hand.
Manual strangulation can be achieved with one hand.
You talked about the stippling, and I want to make sure the jury understands. When you say the stippling is wider with respect to the right lip injury, that would indicate that the gun was further away, correct?
That's correct. The density is proportional to the distance the gun is from the object. So number one is probably less dense, and sometimes you can just appreciate it in the photo by looking, but a bigger pattern is usually a less dense pattern.
And so if it's a tighter pattern, the gun is closer.
That's correct.
You talked about how Ms. Mills asked you if the gun and the body are moving, then that can change the angles, correct?
Yes,
If the body's stationary and the shooter's moving, that can change the angles too.
that's correct.
The mouth, you said, is very vascular.
Yes,
When it gets injured, you bleed a lot.
usually yes.
And it's a natural reflex that you said that when people get hurt in the mouth, they start spitting.
Usually yes.
we've all seen television. Is it like television where you get shot and you bounce back 10 feet?
No.
Have they done studies on that?
There's lots of video of people being shot, and almost no one is forced backward by the weight of the bullet.
Any recross?
Just one moment.
You may have a moment.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Dr. Miller, you may step down. Thank you. Please. We are obviously at a time that we will take our afternoon recess. Please, as always, do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else, and do not allow anyone to discuss it in your presence. Please do not